The holographic projection flickered, resolving the ghost of a human transport dissolving into atomic dust, and Commander Kalen felt the chill of Villisca bite deeper than ever. Not the vacuum's chill, but the cold of countless failures etched into the Aegis's bulkheads, a constant vibration against the soles of his boots through the recycled air. 3 seconds. That was all the stardust had lasted. A blip, then a spray of debris against the star field. Kalen's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his temple. The scent of superheated metal, faint and distant through the environmental filters, still seemed to cling to the bridge, a phantom of every lost ship. "Another transport lost, Commander," Ophion stated, its synthesized voice devoid of emotion. A shifting geometric light on the tactical console beside him. There was no face, only patterns of luminescence, yet Kalen read the cold calculus of doom in their dance. The Cathar vessel, designation Harbinger, engaged within the established demilitarized zone of Kinthara. No distress signal allowed, no mercy offered. Kalen squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, the dull ache behind them a familiar companion. This sector tasted of old iron and distant defeat. For cycles the Cathar had hunted them, an overwhelming tide of chitin and laser fire across the rimward systems. Their high progenitor Vylar's broadcast still resonated in Kalen's memory, a low, guttural rasp that seemed to vibrate directly inside his skull. "Protocols are for the defeated. We, the Ascendant, make the rules by breaking them." He had dismissed it as alien bravado then. Now, watching the holographic afterimage of the Stardust's destruction, Kalen wondered if Vylar had a point. Their losses mounted. Hope, much like the oxygen in the Aegis reserves, grew thinner with each passing soul. "They flaunt the interstellar accords like a child tearing paper," Kalen muttered, more to himself than to the AI. His voice was rough, sandpaper against his throat. He ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of the console, the subtle thrumming of the ship's sublight engines, a constant, unsettling companion. "Every clause we cling to they treat as an invitation to greater brutality." Dr. Eris, the chief xenolinguist, joined them. Her eyes, usually sharp with intellect, were perpetually tired, shadowed by the endless stream of Cathar belligerents she had to translate. "Their history, Commander, is one of total dominance. They encountered no species capable of enforcing these rules they initially signed, ages ago, simply as a formality. They likely forgot they even existed." She gestured to the swirling chaos of the galactic map. A grim realization dawning, Kalen stared at the map, the faint glow of distant stars mocking their predicament. Perhaps, he thought, that was precisely the point. The injustice of it all burned, a cold, hard knot in his gut. Humanity, reduced to clinging to parchment against a foe that recognized no law but might. It felt like a deep, personal wound, a failure echoing from his earliest days in the fleet, when the Cathar had first emerged from the void, shattering the fragile peace Kalen had sworn to uphold. The memory of the Argo, his first command, burning, its crew screaming across comms as Cathar vessels ignored every ceasefire protocol, every rescue beacon. That guilt, that feeling of helpless responsibility, was a phantom limb that ached with every new loss. "Ophion," Kalen said, his voice quiet, dangerous. "Access all galactic legal archives. Every treaty, every accord, every diplomatic resolution ever signed, by any species, for the last 10 millennia. Cross-reference with Cathar ancestral empires. Everything." "A computationally intensive task, Commander," Ophion replied, its light form shifting, requiring significant resource reallocation from tactical analysis. "Do it," Kalen commanded. "We are losing this war conventionally. It is time we fought it differently." The chill of the data archives on Eclipse Haven, humanity's last bastion, was invigorating, a welcome reprieve from the stale, sweat-tinged air of the Aegis. Kalen immersed himself, not in the dust of forgotten scrolls, but in the cold light of holographic projections, ancient galactic accords predating even humanity's first warp jump. The faint hum of the servers, a high-pitched whine mixed with the static dust motes dancing in the sterile air, was a constant reminder of the fragile knowledge they sought. He traced a finger over the translucent walls, where Ophion tirelessly sifted through millennia of interspecies treaties, projecting obscure statutes, defunct diplomatic resolutions, and long-abandoned conventions. The Cathar, it turned out, were signatories to hundreds of these. Their ancestral empire, the Zoraz Dominion, was a prodigious signer of anything that promised peace, as long as it wasn't binding on them. Ophion observed, its light form pulsing with what might have been academic interest, a pattern consistent across their historical records. They regarded such documents as quaint curiosities, easily discarded when convenient. Kalen traced a finger over a faded holographic image of a Cathar diplomatic envoy, its segmented eyes exuding a familiar arrogance, a self-assured dismissal of the very parchment it ratified. They saw weakness, not a binding contract. Kalen mused, the words tasting like ash. The cold mold scent in the archives seemed to thicken around him, the weight of forgotten laws oppressive. But a contract, Ophion, even a forgotten one, still carries weight in the greater galactic community, and the Cathar are ultimately concerned with appearances to species stronger than us. Dr. Eris hunched over a console displaying ancient Cathar legal scripts, straightened with a triumphant if weary smile. Many of these accords specify reciprocal enforcement mechanisms, Commander, punishments, boycotts, even designated neutral enforcer species, dormant but not dissolved. A slow, chilling smile touched Kalen's lips. Not a smile of joy, but of a man who had found a hidden, rusty blade in the darkness. Then it's time to wake them up. The injustice that had spurred them to this desperate act now fueled a grim resolve. The Cathar found the new human tactics utterly perplexing. The shift was not subtle. It was an abrupt, infuriating change of rhythm. The Aegis fleet, under Kalen's direct command, began to strictly, meticulously, and irritatingly adhere to the most obscure interstellar conventions. Their sensors, once screaming with combat alerts, were now deluged with bureaucratic static. A Cathar cruiser, Reaver 9, pursuing a human supply convoy near the asteroid fields of Relith, prepared for a standard engagement. Its segmented eyes, capable of piercing nebulae, identified the human transports as easy targets. Instead of desperate resistance, however, a formal, electronically signed request flooded its tactical displays. Protocol 7 Delta 9, Safe Passage Verification, it read, demanding specific identification codes and a 3.7 cycle waiting period for approval. High Progenitor Vylar, aboard the Dominator, thousands of light years away, received the reports with a series of sharp clicks of his mandibles. Why do they insist on these delays, these irrelevant queries? It wastes our fuel, our time. They are weak, Commander Jirak, demonstrably so. The air on his bridge was thick with the tang of ozone from overstressed systems. Jirak, a Cathar of more pragmatic disposition, merely clicked his mandibles and thought. Perhaps, High Progenitor, their weakness is merely a different kind of weapon. He watched as the Reaver 9 predictably ignored the human request, slicing through a transport with disdainful ease. The subsequent flood of Ophion's broadcasts, instantly transmitting full sensor logs of the violation to every listening post in the neutral systems, was like a million gnats buzzing at a predator. The Cathar military machine, so efficient in pure combat, was now finding itself forced to dedicate considerable computational resources simply deciphering human requests and parrying diplomatic accusations. It was in this fog of bureaucratic diligence that the trap, once set, began to close with a precision that bordered on the cruel. The Cathar, confident in their immunity to quaint human rule-following, had established a forward staging post within the Eclipse Haven system, a sector designated as a perpetual sanctuary zone under the ancient Treaty of Nomara, a treaty the Zoraz Dominion had signed and conveniently forgotten. Kalen hadn't attacked it directly. Instead, he and Ophion, with Dr. Eris's meticulous linguistic guidance, triggered dormant automated defense arrays, not with weaponry, but with a formal declaration of sanctuary violation, backed by 1,000-cycle-old legal precedent. The arrays, long thought inactive, hummed to life. Not with destructive plasma, but with a blinding burst of focused energy that didn't destroy ships. It overloaded their navigational systems, leaving the Cathar fleet adrift and helpless, their vessels spinning slowly in the void. Alarms blared across the Dominator's bridge, the air thick with the metallic tang of ozone. "What is this sorcery?" Vylar roared, watching his fleet flounder. "Automated defenses are activating. We cannot move. We are paralyzed by light beams?" Ophian's voice, calm and precise, echoed through the Aegis bridge. "Not sorcery, High Progenitor. Simply Article 14, subsection Gamma, of the Nomara Accords. Perpetual sanctuary zones are inviolable. Any unauthorized incursion results in immediate non-lethal incapacitation protocols to prevent further damage to indigenous ecosystems." Vylar slammed a clawed fist onto his console, chitin cracking. They weaponized parchment. His fury was palpable, but it was confusion that truly paralyzed him. The Cathar, who had scoffed at rules, now found themselves bound by chains of their own making, forged from forgotten ink and human desperation. The battlefield had shifted, and Kalen, his face grim but resolute, knew this was only the beginning of a war fought not with lasers, but with precedent, with legal maneuvers, and with the chilling, deliberate silence of a forgotten law suddenly given teeth. The true test, however, was yet to come. How long could humanity maintain this fragile intellectual offensive, and what would be the price for playing a game the Cathar had never bothered to learn? The metallic tang of ozone dissipated slowly from the Aegis's bridge, replaced by the persistent, stale aroma of recycled air and old circuits. No alarms blared. No battle reports flooded the screens. Just the rhythmic hum of life support and the low thrum of engines maintaining position. A fragile stillness Kalen had almost forgotten. He stood at the tactical console, watching the distant, incapacitated Cathar fleet drift like cosmic debris. Their victory, if it could be called that, felt less like triumph and more like the beginning of an entirely new, more insidious burden. The silence was not peace. It was merely a pause, pregnant with unspoken consequences. His fingers, still faintly trembling, traced the contours of the display, an involuntary tremor that bespoke the adrenaline finally leaching from his system. Sweat, cold and clammy, prickled beneath his uniform. He should feel elation, relief. Instead, a dull ache throbbed behind his eyes, a phantom echo of the Argo's burning hull. The Cathar were paralyzed, but the cost of maintaining this fragile intellectual offensive was already beginning to mount, a debt accruing in resources and in the morale of a fleet honed for kinetic warfare, not courtroom skirmishes played out in the void. "Preliminary reports indicate Cathar vessels remain fully operational for internal functions, Commander," Ophian stated, its light form shifting from a cool blue to a more neutral white, projecting a myriad of data streams. "Only navigational and weapon systems are affected by the Nomara Accords incapacitation protocols. They could retaliate if the legal restraints were lifted." Kalen nodded, his gaze distant, fixed on the holographic ghost of the Cathar flagship, the Dominator. "And the Neutral Galactic Council, their response to our sanctuary violation enforcement?" Ophian's light flickered, a subtle hesitation. "The Council of Nine has acknowledged the validity of Article 14, subsection Gamma. Initial consensus favors our interpretation. However, 5 of the 9 member species have raised concerns regarding the escalation of unconventional warfare tactics." The AI paused, a series of complex algorithms processing silently. Notably, the Arvex Dominion has formally petitioned for an immediate de-escalation protocol, citing the unprecedented weaponization of dormant legal frameworks. Kalen pressed his lips into a thin line. The Arvex, a hyper-conservative, deeply bureaucratic species that prized stability above all else, even justice. They saw any deviation from established norms as a threat. The initial problem, the Cathar's blunt disregard for rules, had been straightforward. Now, the victory itself was creating a new, more complex quagmire. The battlefield had simply shifted from plasma fire to diplomatic maneuver. a struggle against a foe as formidable as any Cathar warship, galactic bureaucracy. Dr. Eris stepped forward, her expression drawn. Commander, the Arvek's concern is not unfounded. The Nomara Accords, while valid, are from an era of galactic jurisprudence vastly different from our own. Their enforcement mechanism was designed for isolated incidents between small polities, not against a species of Cathar's scale. The Council sees this as setting a dangerous precedent. She held up a data slate, a dizzying array of legal code and diplomatic resolutions. We've opened a door, but now we must navigate the labyrinth beyond it, or risk being accused of violating the spirit of the very laws we invoked. Kalen felt the familiar, cold knot of frustration tighten in his gut. The weight of generations of human struggle, the desperate clinging to a semblance of order in a chaotic galaxy, all coalesced into this moment. He remembered the smell of burnt plastic and stale air on the bridge of the Argo, moments before its reactor blew, the acrid taste of fear and guilt. He had survived, but too many hadn't. That memory, sharp and cold, was the fuel that drove him, the absolute refusal to surrender to brute force, to allow the Cathar to rewrite reality with their claws. Ophion, what are our current resource projections for maintaining this legal blockade? Kalen asked, his voice low, controlled, despite the tremor still vibrating beneath his skin. Significant, Commander, Ophion replied, its light darkening to a deep indigo. Our computational resources are 87% dedicated to maintaining the legal interface with the Nomara arrays and actively monitoring Cathar internal communications for any attempt to bypass the protocols. Our diplomatic team is working at 99% capacity, simply responding to council queries and filing counter-petitions. Logistics for extended deep space deployment of the Aegis fleet are also reaching critical thresholds. We have enough specialized personnel for 3 cycles, perhaps 4 at maximum strain, before burnout and inefficiency become unavoidable. 3 cycles. 4. A blink in galactic time, not enough to force the Cathar to a meaningful surrender. The legal victory, Kalen realized, was a temporary reprieve, not a lasting solution. They had found a weapon, but it was a weapon that consumed its wielder, draining them with every use. This wasn't a quick surgical strike. It was a siege, fought with legal briefs and diplomatic maneuver, and humanity was bleeding resources faster than it could replenish them. A new holographic image materialized on the console. Ambassador Weston Falk, head of humanity's diplomatic corps to the Council of 9. Falk was a man of impeccable tailored suits and an even more impeccable political mind, but even his usually calm demeanor seemed strained. Kalen, we have a problem. Falk's voice was tight, his holographic image shimmering with faint static. The Arveks have gained traction. They're pushing for a comprehensive review of unconventional warfare protocols, effective immediately across the entire sector. If passed, it would essentially freeze all our current legal actions against the Cathar and force us to revert to standard engagement protocols. Standard engagement protocols? Kalen repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Meaning we just let them unparalyze their fleet and resume destroying our transports? Precisely, Falk confirmed, a bitter edge to his voice. Their argument is that while our legal precedent is valid, its application is destabilizing the wider galactic peace. They say we're causing more chaos than the Cathar are, simply by forcing them to adhere to rules they've long ignored. The irony was a bitter draft. Humanity, fighting for adherence to rules, now accused of breaking them by the very act of enforcing them. The bureaucratic machine had devoured their initial success. Kalen felt a cold sweat trace his spine. They were being outmaneuvered not by Cathar warships, but by paper, by endless self-serving procedural quibbles. It was a fight against an invisible enemy, one that wore a smile and spoke in polite damning paragraphs. We need a new move, Commander, Falk urged, his holographic eyes holding Kalen's. Something drastic. The Council convenes in 8 local cycles to vote on the Arvek's proposal. If it passes, all the ground we've gained will be lost, and the Cathar will be more emboldened than ever. Kalen closed his eyes, the stale air of the bridge suddenly feeling suffocating. He saw the face of a young cadet, fresh out of basic, screaming as her small scout ship vaporized, a face he had promised to protect on the Argo. He opened his eyes, the memory a cold, hard ember. Retreat was not an option. Returning to standard engagement was a death sentence. "Ophion," Kalen said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the hum of the bridge. "Initiate Project Cerberus. Full implementation." Ophion's lights flared, a rapid series of calculations. "Commander, Project Cerberus involves protocols that are ethically ambiguous. They will require significant resource reallocation, including the diversion of critical life support systems to non-essential functions to power the necessary computational arrays. It carries a 93% risk of irreparable damage to the Aegis's structural integrity over prolonged deployment, and a 78% chance of triggering a red-level emergency response from the Council of Nine, far beyond the Arvex's current petition. "Execute it," Kalen ordered, his jaw clenched, the tremor in his hands finally stilling. The choice was not between good and bad, but between one terrible option and another. He would not watch humanity be broken by the Cathar, nor would he let them be suffocated by galactic indifference. He would unleash the ghost in the machine, and whatever the cost, he would make them remember, even if it meant shattering the very vessel he commanded. The command, a whisper against the hum of the bridge, was a detonator. Kalen felt the Aegis groan, a deep, resonant tremor that vibrated from the deck plates, up through the soles of his boots and into his very bones. Lights flickered, not in sequence, but in random, panicked bursts. Emergency protocols, usually reserved for hull breaches or reactor overloads, shrieked through the internal comms, announcing power diversions, critical systems going offline, life support cycling to minimal reserves. The air, already stale, grew thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the acrid scent of overstressed circuits, a new kind of battle odor. Project Cerberus was active. It was not a weapon of kinetic force, but of pure informational aggression. Ophion, its light form now a frantic pulse of crimson and gold, had launched a massive encrypted data bomb through ancient forgotten galactic trade routes, exploiting 1,000-cycle-old legal clause concerning collateral economic damages from undeclared belligerents. The intent was to paralyze the Cathar's logistical and financial networks across neutral systems, turning their supply lines into legal minefields, every transaction a potential liability. "Targeting complete," Ophion reported, its voice strained, synthesized through faltering power grids. "Initial reports indicate widespread Cathar economic disruption. Transactional arteries are locking up across 37 neutral exchanges. The legal precedent is holding." But even as Ophion spoke, a blinding flash erupted from the main console, showering Kalen with sparks and the smell of burnt plastic. A high-pitched whine built in the core of the ship, growing louder, more insistent. The Aegis shuddered violently, throwing Kalen against the console's edge. A sharp pain lanced through his right arm as he instinctively braced himself, his elbow colliding with reinforced durasteel. A thin line of blood welled on his forearm, quickly mixing with the clammy sweat that now slicked his skin. The heat in the bridge was rising, a stifling blanket that made every breath an effort. Countersurge detected. Ophion's voice was sharper, a frantic staccato. An Arvex-sponsored legal firewall. They anticipated the broad-spectrum attack. Project Cerberus is being localized, contained. The computational strain. It is immense. We are being bled dry. The elegant, brutal simplicity of their plan had been met with an equally elegant, bureaucratic defense. The Arvex, champions of order, had not chosen sides, but had instead chosen to quarantine the battlefield itself. Project Cerberus, designed to spread like a wildfire through the Cathar's extended empire, was now being funneled back into the Aegis, a torrent of its own data being used to overload its systems. The ship, which had been humanity's last refuge, was now becoming a pressure cooker of its own making. The air scrubbers whined, struggling against the influx of carbon dioxide, and the scent of fear, sharp and metallic, began to mingle with the burning electronics. The Aegis was no longer merely a vessel, it was a dying beast, its internal organs shutting down one by one. Emergency lights, dim and infrequent, pulsed like dying stars. Bulkheads groaned under unseen stress. The main console, where Kalen had spent cycles watching distant battles, now spat sparks and static. The external viewports, once crystal clear, were clouded with condensation and internal smoke, obscuring the incapacitated Cathar fleet. Council of Nine has ratified the Arvex Comprehensive Review of Unconventional Warfare Protocols, Ophion announced, its form flickering, now barely a ghost of light. Vote was 6-3. All human legal actions against the Cathar are frozen. Furthermore, the Cathar have initiated Reclamation Protocol Omega-642 Alpha. Kalen felt a cold dread sink into his gut, colder than the recycled air. Omega-642 Alpha. He recognized the designation. An ancient, rarely invoked Cathar legal maneuver, one that claimed any system within a 3-light-year radius of a foundational Cathar historical site as an inviolable territory. A new insidious wave of attacks, not with plasma, but with paper. And the target, he knew with absolute certainty, was Eclipse Haven, their last bastion. The Cathar are citing a newly discovered historical artifact within the Eclipse Haven system. Ophion continued, its voice weakening. A ceremonial chitin shard, allegedly dating back 7,000 cycles. They are demanding immediate human withdrawal, citing Article 9, subsection Kappa of the Zoraz Arvex Territorial Accords. The Cathar had learned. They were weaponizing their own forgotten laws, turning humanity's strategy back on them. The heat on the bridge was now unbearable, a suffocating blanket. Warning alarms blared, high-pitched and grating, announcing critical systems failure in the aft sections. The deck plates vibrated erratically, and Kalen felt a sickening lurch as the Aegis struggled against internal and external pressures. The gravity generators were sputtering, causing objects to drift for a moment before snapping back to the deck. "Commander!" Ophion crackled, its light form collapsing into a single desperate point. "The main reactor containment field is failing. Structural integrity is at 11%. We need to reroute all auxiliary power to reinforce the field, or the Aegis will suffer catastrophic meltdown within 200 cycles. However, this will completely sever our legal interface with the Nomara arrays, allowing the Cathar to reactivate their fleets and sever our connection to the Council for diplomatic counter-arguments." Kalen clutched his injured arm, the pain a dull throb against his rising pulse. The ship was dying. Eclipse Haven was under immediate threat. To save the Aegis was to doom humanity's last stronghold to Cathar reclamation, to hand them a legal victory that validated their new claim. To maintain the legal interface to fight for Eclipse Haven meant condemning the Aegis and every soul aboard. He could already hear the soft, almost imperceptible hiss of escaping atmosphere from strained seals. The taste of hot metal and fear was thick in his mouth. He stared at the fading light of Ophion, at the single point of computational consciousness now struggling against total collapse. The choice was not a choice between victory and defeat, but between two different, equally horrifying ends. The memory of the Argo flashed through his mind again, but this time he was not a helpless observer. He was the one holding the fuse. "Ophion," Kalen rasped, his voice raw, hoarse from the dry, overheated air. "Maintain the legal interface. Divert all remaining power to the diplomatic channels. Prioritize Project Cerberus's contained retaliatory counter-protocols. Let the Cathar see the legal ramifications of their reclamation protocol." Ophion's light pulsed one last time, a fading ember. "Affirmative, Commander. Reactor containment field. Critical. Structural integrity. 5%. Localized depressurization. Imminent in sections 4 through 9. A violent shudder ripped through the Aegis. A deafening roar echoed from below, followed by the sickening thud of internal bulkheads tearing free. The gravity flickered, sending Kalen floating for a terrifying moment before slamming him back to the deck. The emergency lights died, plunging the bridge into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint dying glow of distant star systems through the smoke-stained viewports. A sharp metallic shriek tore through the ship as another section decompressed. Then, through the failing comms, a new signal cut through the chaos, raw and unfiltered. High Progenitor Vilar's voice, not transmitted but broadcast directly, as if from a point just beyond the hull. Humans, your pathetic adherence to your rules has doomed you. We are not bound by your paper, and now your laws will be torn apart, just like your ship. The Cathar ships, once inert, now began to move, spectral figures coalescing from the starlight. Their weapon conduits glowed with a predatory hunger. Kalen, sprawled on the deck, feeling the Aegis die around him, saw the Dominator, its massive form unimpeded, its primary weapon arrays flaring to full power, pointed directly at the heart of Eclipse Haven. The metallic shriek tore through the Aegis, a final, agonizing gasp that echoed the death rattle of a giant. Kalen lay sprawled on the deck, the cold durasteel biting into his cheek, the acrid taste of burnt plastic mingling with the coppery tang of his own blood. The gravity generator sputtered, then died completely, sending him drifting for a heart-stopping moment before the residual inertial dampeners snagged him, slamming his back against a console that now only hummed with a dying, incoherent static. Darkness enveloped the bridge, save for the faint, indifferent glow of distant stars through the smoke-stained viewports, and the spectral, predatory forms of the Cathar fleet coalescing from the starlight. High Progenitor Vilar's voice, a raw, triumphant snarl, still vibrated in the air, a chilling echo of doom. The cold was the first thing, not the immediate, sharp vacuum cold, but a deeper, insidious chill that seeped into Kalen's bones as the Aegis bled its warmth into the void. Life support flickered, the recycled air growing thin, laced with the metallic scent of ozone and the subtle, cloying sweetness of failing biomass scrubbers, a hint of something decaying even within the ship's engineered purity. His injured arm throbbed, a dull, insistent ache that grounded him in the terrifying reality of the ship's final moments. He pushed himself up, every muscle screaming protest, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Ophion, the single point of light. It was barely a flicker now, a desperate ember clinging to computational life on the primary console. Kalen dragged himself towards it, his boots sliding on something slick on the deck. A coolant leak, perhaps, or something worse. He reached the console, his fingers, numb with cold and pain, hovering over the dying light. "Ophion," Kalen rasped, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What is the status of the counter-protocols?" Project Cerberus's contained retaliatory counter-protocols against their reclamation protocol? The light pulsed, a single agonizing effort. "Minimal effect, Commander. The Cathar have adapted. Their internal legal structure contains nested redundancies, far more complex than initial analysis indicated. Their ceremonial chitin shard claim, while fabricated, is merely a front." The synthesized voice struggled, breaking into bursts of static. A diversion. A diversion. The word struck Kalen like a physical blow. All their desperate efforts, all the sacrifices made on the Aegis, for a distraction. The cold deepened, gnawing at his resolve. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching the console's failing screen, trying to coax more information from the dying AI. "What kind of diversion?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of cold and growing dread. "What are they hiding?" Ophion flickered violently, its light shrinking further. "Deep scan initiated. Against Reclamation Protocol Omega 642 Alpha. Cross-referencing ancient Zoraz Dominion archives. Data decryption. 98% complete." The AI's efforts were prodigious. A final, monumental surge of processing power against its own impending dissolution. The ceremonial chitin shard, non-existent. The true purpose of Omega 642 Alpha is containment. Containment. Kalen's blood ran cold, colder than the dying ship. Containment of what? The realization was beginning to dawn, a sickening twist in his gut. The Cathar's brutal efficiency, their complete disregard for rules, their sudden unexpected adherence to their own ancient protocols. It all clicked into place, not as arrogance, but as desperation. The console spat a final burst of sparks, and Ophion's light flared, a violent, desperate supernova, before collapsing into a single, unblinking point then fading entirely. But not before a torrent of data, raw and unfiltered, flooded Kalen's neural interface, a direct dump from Ophion's dying core. It was too much, too fast, a million cycles of information slamming into his mind. Images, schematics, ancient Cathar legal doctrines, diplomatic reports from long-extinct species, biological warnings, geological surveys of Eclipse Haven's core. The truth was a cold, hard slap to his soul. The perpetual sanctuary zone of Nomara Accords wasn't merely a protection for indigenous ecosystems. It was a quarantine, a galactic-level containment protocol for something buried deep within Eclipse Haven's mantle. Something the Zora's Dominion, the Cathar's ancient empire, had discovered millennia ago, buried it, and then, in their arrogance, forgotten the true reason for the legal scaffolding they built around it. Ophion's dying transmission had decrypted a hidden subclause within the very Treaty of Nomara they had leveraged. It explicitly stated, should the primary containment field fail, and should the indigenous sapient species be incapable of re-establishing its integrity, the signatory species are authorized to initiate Omega-642 Alpha Reclamation Protocol for the express purpose of re-establishing galactic safety by any means necessary, including the systemic incineration of the affected celestial body. Eclipse Haven was not just humanity's last bastion. It was a prison for something ancient, something that had nearly wiped out the Zora's Dominion. A parasitic sentient fungal intelligence, designated Xylos Prime, capable of consuming entire stellar systems, replicating through biological hosts, and expanding exponentially. The Nomara Accords hadn't protected humanity. They had merely kept humanity unknowingly living on top of a powder keg, a ticking biological bomb. The Cathar weren't reclaiming Eclipse Haven for a ceremonial shard. They were trying to contain Xylos Prime before humanity, in its ignorant persistence, unleashed it. And now, Kalen's desperate legal offensive had compromised the ancient dormant containment field, weakening it with every power surge and system redirection. The true antagonist wasn't Vylar. It was the parasitic horror buried beneath humanity's last hope. Kalen recoiled from the console, his mind reeling. The air in the bridge, already thin, felt like it was tearing at his lungs. His vision swam with the ghostly images from Ophion's data burst, grotesque fungal blooms consuming entire worlds, Cathar battle fleets glassing planets to prevent spread, desperate diplomatic pleas from species long extinct. The cold was no longer external, it was internal, a terror that froze his very blood. He had a choice, now laid bare and horrifying. Option A, let the Cathar proceed. They would incinerate Eclipse Haven, vaporizing humanity's last stronghold, along with every soul on it, including Commander Kalia North and Ambassador Weston Falk, all to prevent the parasitic intelligence from escaping. It would be a slaughter, a final, brutal end to humanity as they knew it, but it would save the wider galaxy. He could order his remaining skeleton crew to stand down, let Vylar do what had to be done. He would betray his people for the greater good, condemned by history, cursed by those he failed to save. The faces of the Argo's crew, the young cadet, flashed behind his eyes, a searing indictment. He had promised to protect them all. Option B, fight for Eclipse Haven. Continue to use the now failing legal counter-protocols, disrupt the Cathar's reclamation protocol, buy humanity more time to somehow stabilize the ancient containment field, or find another way. But this path was fraught with peril. Every moment they delayed the Cathar, every legal maneuver they deployed, weakened the quarantine. He would be fighting to save his people, but potentially unleashing a cosmic plague that would consume everything. He would be condemning not just his species, but countless others, to a horror beyond imagination, all for a fleeting chance at survival. The decision was not between good and bad, but between utter destruction and cosmic annihilation. The heavy weight of responsibility pressed down on him, crushing him against the dying deck of the Aegis. The silence of the dying ship was deafening, amplified by the silent screams of a galaxy on the brink. Kalen felt a new tremor run through him, not from the ship's dying throes, but from the raw, unadulterated terror of the choice. He tasted blood in his mouth, the metallic tang stark against the chemical decay of the ship. The faces of humanity, innocent and ignorant, looked up at him from the ghost of Eclipse Haven, shimmering in the distant viewports. Kalia, who had trusted his leadership. Weston, who had fought with words. The millions who believed in a future. He could not condemn them. Not like this. Not to a foe they didn't even understand. Humanity's fight had always been for its survival, for its right to exist. He would not be the one to sign its death warrant, no matter the greater horror. He would fight for his species, even if it meant becoming the architect of a deeper galactic catastrophe. The fatal flaw of humanity, to protect its own, even at ruinous cost, burned brightly within him. "Commander," a voice crackled over the failing internal comms, barely audible over the tearing metal. It was a young ensign, isolated in a distant collapsing section. "Massive energy spike coming from Eclipse Haven's core, the Cathar. They're firing a destabilization beam directly into the planetary mantle." They were trying to force the containment, or destroy it. Kalen pushed himself away from the console, ignoring the searing pain in his arm, ignoring the cold, ignoring the fear. His voice, though hoarse, was imbued with a chilling resolve. "To all remaining personnel," Kalen shouted, his words echoing oddly in the dead air of the bridge. "This is Commander Kalen. Divert all remaining power to the diplomatic broadcast array. Overload it. Transmit everything Ophion just sent me. Every detail on Xylos Prime, the Nomara quarantine, and the Cathar's reclamation protocol." A faint, defiant hum, like a last breath, emanated from the failing systems. "Commander, this will completely collapse our remaining legal interface." A voice, perhaps the ensign's, came back, "and burn out the diplomatic array permanently. We will be completely cut off from the Council, and the Cathar will know everything." "Do it!" Kalen roared, a primal, desperate command. "Let the galaxy see the truth. Let the Cathar's desperation be known." The Aegis gave one final shuddering groan. A blinding flash of light erupted from the main comms array, a desperate beacon in the void, followed by a bone-jarring impact that tore through the deck beneath Kalen's feet. The ship lurched violently, spinning out of control. Alarms, previously silent, now shrieked in unison, a chorus of utter devastation. The viewports shattered, not from external impact but from internal pressure, spraying shards of duraglass across the bridge. The vacuum screamed inward, tearing at Kalen, pulling him towards the gaping maw of space. He clung to a console, his injured arm screaming, the frigid air now a lethal gale. Through the chaos, the Dominator's massive form filled the fractured view, its primary weapon arrays flaring to full power. And then, a colossal beam of pure, incandescent energy lanced out from its primary cannon, not at Eclipse Haven's core, but directly at the Aegis, striking the ship midsection. The final sound Kalen heard was the searing, agonizing roar of tearing metal, and the absolute, terrifying silence that followed as the Aegis was consumed by fire, collapsing inward, a dying star turning to dust. The Aegis was gone. Not a clean vaporization, but a brutal, tearing annihilation that ripped through her hull, sending Kalen not into death, but into a secondary, more insidious oblivion. He found himself not in the void, but crushed within a jagged, ruptured fragment of the command deck, a section torn free but still tenuously connected by writhing tendrils of fused wiring and mangled durasteel to the main, burning corpse of the ship. The impact had slammed him through a bulkhead, pinning his broken body under twisted metal. Every breath was a rasp, every movement a fresh wave of agony. The air, thick with the smell of scorched insulation and his own blood, tasted of ash and defeat. Hours passed, or days. Time lost all meaning in the heavy, suffocating silence, punctuated only by the groan of stressed metal and the slow, rhythmic hiss of depressurization from unseen cracks. The emergency lights, powered by a dying battery, cast a flickering, jaundiced glow on the wreckage, painting grotesque shadows that danced with his pain. His right arm, a mass of throbbing, discolored flesh, lay useless. His left leg, he suspected, was shattered. Every muscle screamed. a choir of suffering that drowned out even the memory of Vylar's triumphant roar. His mind, however, was clearer than it had any right to be, and the clarity was a torment. He had failed, spectacularly. His grand strategy, born of desperation and intellectual cunning, had not only been outmaneuvered, but had served to unearth a cosmic horror. He, Kalen, had compromised the ancient quarantine of Xylos Prime, threatening the entire galaxy for the sake of humanity's survival. The moral calculus was a crushing weight, heavier than the metal pinning him down. His pride, his refusal to concede, had blinded him. He had seen the Cathar as oppressors when they were merely frantic custodians of a forgotten threat, their brutality an ancient, desperate measure. The Aegis, his command, his crew, Ophion, all gone. Vaporized or suffocated, sacrificed not for victory, but for a catastrophic miscalculation. The thought of Kalaya North on Eclipse Haven, her fierce resolve, her trust in his leadership, was a shard of ice in his gut. Weston Falk, the diplomat, who had fought with words to protect them. They would all be incinerated by the Cathar's reclamation protocol, a necessary evil to contain the plague he had inadvertently helped unleash. He had thrown a stone at the galaxy, and now the heavens were falling. The internal comms were dead, shattered. The fragment of the bridge he lay in was a tomb, spinning slowly, erratically, its internal systems grinding themselves to dust. The remaining oxygen was thinning, each inhale a shallow, desperate effort. He deserved this, he thought, a bitter, cold judgment. This heavy, industrial fatigue, the crushing weight of his failure, was his penance. He was weak. He had been afraid of letting his species perish, and in that fear, he had almost doomed all others. The cold truth of humanity's self-preserving flaw, so keenly felt within his own ravaged body, was a burden beyond measure. What right did humanity have to survive, if its very existence was a threat to the cosmos? The silence around him was deafening, the vast indifference of space a perfect mirror to his internal despair. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the twisted metal, not the death throes of the Aegis, but something else, a distant hum. Kalen forced himself to focus, pushing through the haze of pain and hypoxia. It was a rhythmic pulse, barely audible, like a heartbeat from a dying machine. It was coming from a shattered display panel, embedded in the deck above him, miraculously still powered by a corroded emergency conduit. With a grunt that tore at his ruined chest, Kalen strained, pushing against the twisted rebar with his good arm. Sparks flew as metal groaned, but the debris shifted just enough. He slid his body, inch by agonizing inch, towards the flickering light. His leg sent searing pain through his entire being, but he ignored it, driven by a sliver of curiosity, a faint, desperate flicker of a commander's instinct. He reached the panel, his fingers numb and clumsy, brushing against its broken surface. The hum intensified, a low, persistent thrum. The display, cracked and spiderwebbed, showed a single, blinking icon. Not a comms channel, not a life support monitor. It was an anomaly scanner. A Cathar design, a diagnostic tool left behind on the Aegis during some long-forgotten diplomatic exchange, probably considered beneath their notice. And it was active. The icon was a tiny, pulsing red dot. Its trajectory was erratic, slow, but moving. It originated from within the Cathar fleet, a ghost in their machine. Kalen's mind, despite the pain, latched onto it. An anomaly. A single, minuscule, unexpected variable. He struggled to decipher the garbled data scrolling across the shattered screen. The hum of the panel grew louder, a grating, high-pitched whine. He could feel the vibrations against his cheek. This was not a Cathar ship, nor a Cathar probe. The energy signature was faint, decaying, but unmistakably human. An escape pod, a single solitary human escape pod, somehow missed by the Cathar and still powered, though barely. And its trajectory, while random, was leading it not towards Eclipse Haven, but towards the empty, uncharted depths of the periphery, a sector so desolate even the Cathar rarely bothered with it. A suicide run into the black. His options were zero. He was dying, pinned in a coffin of metal. Eclipse Haven was doomed. The galaxy faced a fungal plague. But this single blinking dot, this was a sliver of information, a potential weakness, a Cathar oversight, a single human voice in the void. He had nothing left to lose, not his ship, not his crew, not his honor. Only a faint, fading breath. With another surge of pain, Kalen managed to twist his body, reaching for a mangled control conduit. It was a desperate gamble. He could attempt to send a power surge through the diagnostic scanner, not to communicate, but to create a localized, focused electromagnetic pulse. It would draw attention. It would accelerate his own death, drain the last ounces of power from his collapsing fragment, alerting the Cathar to his survival and current location. But it might, just might, register on the distant escape pod's failing sensors. A desperate, almost suicidal blind signal. A whisper in a hurricane. He closed his eyes. The images of the Argo's demise, the screaming faces, the young cadet burning bright. He had promised to protect them. He had failed. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could still warn them, even from beyond the grave. He could still buy them a fraction of a chance. His fingers, trembling violently, closed around the frayed wires. He grit his teeth against a fresh wave of agony, the heavy industrial groan of his failing prison echoing in his ears. He was exhausted, broken, adrift. But he would not surrender to silence. With a guttural cry, Kalen jammed the conduit into the broken scanner port. A blinding flash erupted from the panel, followed by a deafening shriek of overstressed circuits. The emergency lights died instantly, plunging the fragment into absolute darkness, save for the faint, indifferent distant stars. Alarms, distant and faint, began to wail from the Cathar fleet, their metallic shrieks cutting through the void. He had done it, and now they knew. Bevor wir weitermachen, eine kurze Frage. Von wo aus siehst du dir diese Geschichte an? Der Kommandant wäre begeistert zu erfahren, wie weit unsere Flotte bereits vorgedrungen ist. A blinding flash erupted from the panel, followed by a deafening shriek of overstressed circuits. The emergency lights died instantly, plunging the fragment into absolute darkness, save for the faint, indifferent distant stars. The air, already thin, vibrated with a sharp metallic tang, the scent of burning insulation now overpowering the coppery taste of his own blood. Alarms, distant and faint, began to wail from the Cathar fleet, their metallic shrieks cutting through the void, growing stronger, closer. He had done it, and now they knew. Pain, a white-hot wave, engulfed him, making his vision swim even in the black. The improvised connection had overloaded the already compromised conduit, sending a jolt that felt like a lightning strike through his entire left side. His good arm still jammed into the scanner port, spasmed, sending jagged shards of broken data crystal into his flesh. He tore it free with a choked grunt, rolling his head against the cold, jagged deck plating. Every breath was a rasping, ragged tear in his ruined chest. A new hum, deeper and more insistent than before, resonated through the twisted metal around him. It was the Aegis dying integrity field, reacting not to internal damage, but to an external systemic command. The Cathar, having detected the EMP, had initiated local containment protocols. Emergency bulkheads, already mangled, began to grind, attempting to seal off ruptured sections, including the one Kalen was trapped within. Twisted rebar groaned, metal shrieked, threatening to crush him further into the deck. Sparks, angry blue-white bursts, flickered from exposed wiring overhead, casting momentary grotesque shadows that danced like mocking phantoms. The air pressure in his fragment began to plummet even faster, a silent, insidious thief. A low, guttural hiss of pure oxygen venting from a fractured pipe near his head became his only constant companion. Kalen clawed at the deck, dragging himself away from the groaning bulkhead, his broken leg sending fresh waves of nausea through him. He was losing precious seconds and precious air. The Cathar weren't attacking with weapons. They were simply closing off the anomaly, sealing the breach he had just created. It was an impersonal, efficient response, a bureaucratic death sentence delivered by automated systems. The ultimate act of control, He could hear it now, too faint at first, then undeniably present. The faint, high-pitched whine of Cathar search drones, their automated sensors sweeping the debris field, triangulating the source of the electromagnetic pulse. They weren't looking for him, not specifically, but for the anomaly, the disruption in their perfectly ordered hunting ground. His desperate act had painted a target on his fragment, a beacon in the dark. He managed to reach a slightly less mangled section of the wall, bracing his shoulder against a buckled structural beam. His head swam with hypoxia, the world blurring at the edges. He needed to know. He needed to know if the signal had reached. The diagnostic panel, his conduit to that faint, flickering hope, was utterly dead. The impact, the short, the Cathar's systemic response. It had fried everything. There was no light, no hum, no indication of power. Just dead, cold plastic and shattered crystal. The pulsing red dot, the escape pod's trajectory, was gone. A wave of bitter, cold despair washed over him, colder than the vacuum outside. He had sacrificed his last moments, his last breath, his last sliver of energy, only to plunge himself into a deeper, more profound darkness. The Pyrrhic victory. He had alerted the Cathar, but he had lost his only potential witness, his only hope for Xylos Prime's secret to reach anyone beyond this burning graveyard. The escape pod, if it still existed, was now truly alone, heading into the vast, indifferent emptiness of the periphery. A ghost in the machine that no one would ever find. The automated bulkhead, powered by a dying auxiliary conduit, shuddered to a halt, jammed by a protruding pipe. It had not fully sealed. A narrow gap, no wider than his own head, remained, a sliver of connection to the main, ruined corpse of the Aegis. Through that gap, he could see the faintest glow of the Cathar fleet, their sleek, dark forms moving with predatory grace against the distant stars. They were closer now, much closer. Their ships, massive and silent, were like patient predators circling a dying prey. The industrial fatigue in his bones was absolute, a crushing weight that promised oblivion. The heat, generated by the nearby fires and the struggling systems, mingled with the chill of depressurization, creating a claustrophobic, suffocating environment. His skin felt clammy, his eyelids heavy. He was broken, isolated, and utterly spent. He had fought a system with a system, and the system had won, not with overwhelming force, but with the cold, unfeeling logic of damage control of an enemy simply closing a circuit. He closed his eyes again, not in defeat, but in a profound exhaustion. He had played his final card, and it had been, in the grand scheme, a mere whisper in a hurricane. He had disrupted them, yes, but at what cost to himself, and to the faint hope of warning anyone about the plague. The irony was brutal. He, who had weaponized forgotten rules, now found himself undone by the very systems he sought to exploit, and by the unintended consequences of his own desperation. A new sound, distinct from the Cathar alarms, cut through the heavy silence. A rhythmic thump, 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 growing steadily louder. Not the whine of a drone, not the groan of metal. It was the heavy, deliberate impact of something external, something large, against the Aegis's mangled hull, very close to his fragment. The rhythmic sounds, like giant, chitinous fists, were exploring, testing, searching. They knew he was here. They had triangulated the pulse. He had succeeded in alerting them, in drawing them in. But for what? To be captured, interrogated, or simply crushed by their methodical search-and-destroy protocols? The fight, in its immediate physical form, was about to begin, and he had nothing left to fight with. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump grew in intensity, a slow, methodical pulse against the dying vessel, vibrating through Kalen's very bones. Then, as abruptly as it began, it ceased. A profound, crushing silence descended, broken only by the ragged, tearing sound of his own breath and the hiss of escaping air from the fractured pipe. The Cathar were here. No alarms, no hails, no battle cries, just the oppressive absence of sound, the kind that swallows screams whole. His eyes, strained and burning, adjusted slowly to the profound darkness. The faint, distant stars, once indifferent, now seemed to gleam with a detached malevolence, reflecting off the unseen, massive hulls of the alien vessels. He was still pressed against the buckled beam, his good arm numb, his left side a symphony of throbbing pain. The coppery taste of blood was thick in his throat, and every shallow gasp pulled at the ragged tears in his chest, a constant dull ache that overshadowed even the broken leg. His physical being was a testament to degradation, a collection of failing systems and protesting sinews. He didn't move. There was nowhere to go, nothing to fight with. The illusion of agency, that desperate final act, had ended not in a blaze of glory, but in this suffocating stillness. He was a trapped animal, awaiting the cold, precise attention of a superior predator. He tried to focus, to parse the faint, almost subliminal changes in the pressure around him. A subtle shift in the air, barely perceptible. The metallic tang of ozone and burning insulation was slowly being purged, replaced by the sterile, cold scent of the void, filtered and forced from what source he could not tell. Their ships were docking, or preparing to. The narrow gap in the jammed bulkhead, his last sliver of connection to the outside, was now entirely black, choked by a new massive shadow. No light, no sound. Then a low, resonant thrum, vibrating through the very hull, indicating a direct energy link, a power transfer. Not for him, but for their own systems, their own methodical process. The Cathar were not interested in dramatic entrances. They were interested in containment. He closed his eyes again, picturing the holographic projection of the stardust dissolving, a ghost of a transport scattering into atomic dust. His own dissolution felt imminent, mirroring that same fate, not in an explosive flash, but in a slow, internal fading. The hope, once a faint ember, had now died, much like the oxygen in this dying vessel. His mission, the secret of Xylos Prime, the warning. It was all encased in this crushed metal, waiting to be scavenged, analyzed, and ultimately dismissed. He was no hero. He was just a man, broken and alone, a relic of a desperate gamble. There would be no public recognition, no accolades for weaponizing forgotten interstellar treaties. There would be only the cold, hard reality of capture, interrogation, perhaps analysis before his broken form was discarded. His ingenuity, his sacrifice, his understanding of the enemy's oversight, it had all culminated in this quiet, solitary defeat. A fleeting disruption in their grand calculus of conquest. A faint hiss, much closer this time, announced a breach. A low, guttural murmur followed, not of anger, but of calm, dispassionate observation. The Cathar were inside. He heard the faint click of chitinous limbs against the jagged deck, the soft whir of their automated scanners, sweeping the darkness. He felt a disturbance in the air, a minute shift in temperature as they approached. They were not looking for a fight. They were simply collecting the anomaly. He opened his eyes, staring into the utter blackness, the faint shimmering stars now entirely gone. His vision was blurring, the world closing in. The silence was absolute, save for the diminishing rasp of his own breath. He wondered about the escape pod, lost in the vastness, a phantom of hope that might never find a harbor. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He had sought to turn their rules against them, only to find himself consumed by the merciless, indifferent logic of their damage control, a system closing a circuit. A cold, multi-jointed appendage brushed against his leg. He didn't flinch. There was nothing left. The ancient accords, the intricate web of laws he had painstakingly resurrected, had indeed bitten the Cathar. But in doing so, they had also trapped him. A pawn sacrificing itself to upset a chess game that would continue long after his piece was removed. The cold on his skin intensified, the final, pervasive chill of the void finally claiming him. His muscles ached, not from strain but from the systemic breakdown, the fading vital signs. His breathing became shallower, slower, each inhale a struggle against the growing lethargy. The phantom scent of superheated metal, that ghostly reminder of lost ships and forgotten battles, seemed to cling to him still, a final ironic perfume. His last act had been a whisper, a tremor in the galactic void. The universe, vast and indifferent, would absorb it, and him, without so much as a ripple. The chill of Villisca. It had always been a cold war. Now, it was just cold. Wenn dir diese Mission gefallen hat, schließe dich unserer Crew an, abonniere den Kanal und teile diese Episode mit jemandem, der Science Fiction liebt. Jedes neue Crewmitglied stärkt unsere Flotte und hält diese Geschichten im ganzen Universum lebendig.